My name's Jemima Carmody and I attended Winona School, and the name of my piece is If a Tree Falls and There's No One Around, Did It Ever Even Crash or Even Make a Sound? And essentially it's an ode to the seemingly minute but unequivocally impactful endeavours of our lives, and essentially the fact that we often tend to assume that we leave little legacy or that a lot of the things we do have little impact, but undeniably they have so much more consequence than we'd ever assume. To be selected for the showcase is an incredible honour. I think unexpected, but when you've, as we all have for this project, put so much work into something, it's incredibly rewarding. It was a long process, at times tedious, but I think overwhelmingly it was one of incredible joy and fun and satisfaction. I began with small narrative vignettes, kind of inspired by my nanny's story, and other stories that I'd just picked up off the street or out of newspapers. And then I wanted to do something with these little pieces of narrative, and then it was kind of figuring out how to weave them together. And I began by kind of intertwining them, finding common links, and then I eventually made the decision to move it into the sound medium, and that for me was when it kind of really came together. I think having that vocal quality impressed the words with a lot more meaning than they had been when they were just on paper. At the start, I was quite daunted because I didn't really know where I was going, and I honestly didn't have faith in myself that I could write something of such quantity. But then once I started writing in a way that was kind of really personal to me, and I kind of let go of trying to fabricate a narrative voice that was inspired by other authors and things like that, it kind of came a lot easier. And then once you feel that flow, it's just like such an enjoyable experience because you're like, yes, this is what I want to write. When you can finally articulate everything that's going on in your mind and all the thoughts you're having, it's just so satisfying. But having said that, there were definitely moments of trial and hardship and like dead ends. So I think it's just like accepting when that happens, taking time away from writing, and then when you come back, like kind of really dialing in when you have those moments of inspiration. What gave my piece originality was the fact that my nanny's story was so untold, and was so kind of unique and personal to her and also me. And so in that way, it was something that had never been done before because it was her story and no one else's. My nanny has always kind of had this enjoyment of writing, which I've perhaps inherited. She would write up kind of these like just pages of notes about her life. And I remember one afternoon I was kind of just noticing them, and she was like, would you like me to share them with you? And I read them. And I think I'd always underestimated my nanny up until that point. And the moment I read them, I was so fascinated because it was just like this whole new world, this whole new woman had opened up in front of me. And to hear about these kind of experiences of such like horrible tragedy, but also like simultaneous strength was just like so eye-opening and so inspiring. And I was like, I have to tell this story because she deserves to have this told, as we all do. We all deserve to have our stories preserved. With the sound medium, playing with that and the soundtrack behind my piece was kind of an interesting consideration of form. But then also in my writing, I think I had quite a hybrid style of like, it wasn't just narrative, it was also quite like persuasive and discursive and didactic in a way. And I kind of wanted to have a really tangible didactic message. And so in that way, it almost became a combination of like storytelling and narrative, but also kind of speech, like a written speech, and a form of persuasion. So I think that hybrid form and genre was really something that I enjoyed playing with. When I switched over to the sound medium, very last minute, I think I'd always kind of been writing imagining it as if it was spoken, because I do naturally quite like enjoy writing speeches, and so I think that was already kind of impressed into my writing, which was very helpful. But then I think it was just like taking that leap, which my teacher really inspired me to do, so I'm very grateful to her for that. And so then it was figuring out like how my soundtrack behind the piece would not like take away for the piece but enhance the emotion of certain moments. And then there was challenge when it came to recording, because it's 15 minutes of of speech, and so being able to do that kind of flawlessly without fumbling was quite a challenge. In stylistically making my work conversational, I tried to really imagine my audience when writing it, and I kind of tried to make almost a direct call of action, like I used collective pronouns and things like that. And yeah, spoke about us almost as like a collective people. And I think there were some moments where I kind of just directly stated my argument rather than kind of hiding it in more subtle narrative, where there also were moments of subtle narrative, but I kind of tried to have also some really just didactic call-outs to my audience. That was kind of a way of making it conversational, which then translated well into the podcast form. My biggest challenge throughout this process was probably really learning to just trust my writing and kind of embrace my own natural narrative voice rather than trying to kind of really mimic other authors or things like that, but just kind of really, because it was at that moment when I really just like trusted that I had kind of my own thing to say, and that was something that mattered and that would be valuable in my piece. That was when it kind of really like got off the ground and came to life. My biggest advice for people taking up the course or wanting to write is that you will have like moments where you have no idea where you're going, or where you get writer's block and you just feel like you've got nothing else to say. When you get moments like that, I think you either like take a step back from your work and just kind of let it sit, and then moments of inspiration will come over the following weeks, and you'll have like a point in time where you're sitting there in class or something and suddenly just have an idea and like grasp onto that moment and really use that. But I also say, like, whenever you're writing, don't think that what you're writing right now has to be perfect. Don't think that these sentences have to be kind of these like all these perfect clauses, and like your language has to be spot on. Just like try expressing yourself as if you were writing in your diary or writing to yourself, not writing to an audience. And then I think that's when you can kind of overcome those moments of when you're stuck. Decisions that my teacher supported me in were firstly embracing that natural narrative voice, and just like kind of writing in a way that I wanted to, rather than a way that I felt I should, or that I felt would sound good. And then also making that leap to the sound medium was something that I wouldn't have done if it wasn't for her saying, just go for it, it's gonna pay off. And so I'm very grateful to her for that. And also with my time management, that was very helpful as well. She was good at keeping me on track. I've watched over my life as my nanny has begun to slip into the alleys of time, shrinking into eternal irrelevance. Her rooms today are full of vacancy. On our last visit, she'd brought out some old china cups to the table, but they weren't for tea. She wanted us to take them. I've always kind of pitied her. Her orange bricked bungalow in a Maitland development, alone in a sterile dark. A thin film of the cigarettes she supposedly quit clinging to her. The big clock marking away her life, and her rusted screen door curling in the dry heat. Her street every summer, a snow globe of aged Januaries. Who needs DJ's Christmas windows? Come to East Maitland, a town suspended in the bygone. It's a perverse confession, horribly cruel, but she has always seemed so unamounting, deficient, like most of us, never a name to be known. Maybe she wanted us to keep the cups so that every time we pursed and sipped, they would remind us fondly of her. But I knew that soon they'd become just like every other cup, and they would find their way into the house of her great-grandkids, my kids, and they would ask about the old chipped china, and I would say it was Nanny's, but they would not know who that is. I would picture her as some concept on paper when I remember her as a person. But only a few of us remember her as that. In fact, only a few of us remember her at all, and soon no one, and then she never lived. And her 75 and however many years do not matter. And that's the same as us all. None of us are unique. And the truth is, it doesn't matter whether you live, because in the end, it's as if you didn't. Because if a tree falls in a forest and there's nobody around, Who's to say it crashed or even made a sound?